Maria. It is nice to be back with you here today.
It is nice. Good to see you again.
You as well, back outside before it starts getting swampy there in Florida.
Yes, I've got about another 2 to 3 weeks before it becomes unbearable. But while it's still spring and while the temperature's lovely, I'm getting every ounce of this that I can.
Yeah, same. Pretty soon it'll be 110 here, and then 106 is my threshold for going outside.
That's right, because you're in Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have
It gets hot.
that dry heat. We have
Mm-hmm.
a ton of humidity here.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm from is the humidity, so I don't miss it.
See, and I love it.
Anyway.
My hair's like, yes. But yeah, but Florida's like you've literally got till, you know, end of May really before we're in full on summer, and then it's inside we go.
Yeah, bugs, all of the stuff. I could talk about the weather all day. I know people don't love it, but sorry, I love it. But today we're going to talk about the overextended manager. So last week, then go check out the live that we did, and we talked all about, leadership in general. But today we wanted to talk about how what is the role of a leader today and how is it evolving? I have a whole list of titles and expectations thrown on managers. I'll get to that. But what do you think about this role of the leader today? Leader, manager, we'll talk about that another time. But in 2025, the evolution, what are some responsibilities maybe that have been thrown onto the role?
Well, oh my gosh. So, I think to talk about the evolution, you almost have to go back to where we started, right? So when we think about like managers in general, and I think what people are always thinking about is when we hit the Industrial Revolution and you had people working in factories, and there are people who are just managing the work, making sure the processes continue to flow. And then I think we evolved to, yes, you have to make sure the work gets done. But I think the addition to that is you also have to be someone who has taken on an onus of care of the people who do the work. And you have to add in all of those extra pieces. So you are part counselor, you are part advisor, you are part coach, you are part career advisor. You are a lot of things that really are more human centered and human focused than just the work. So, I always say, managing people is the balance of relationships and results. And the shift for me, I think, has been it was purely relationship for a lot of years. Even if you think about how we used to just talk about business, we'd be like, oh, it's just business, leave your personal life outside of this. To bring your whole self to work, it's for me, I think the balance of what used to be relationship or results has now been like it's also relationship. And I think you are the glue between the relationship that someone has with the organization as well. They are that linchpin point. So I know Ben Eubanks did a study, a good friend of mine, who basically said the way that people feel about their manager is also how they feel about their organization. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important role, but I think it has shifted to more of a relationship manager than it is just a tactical executioner.
Yeah, and we talk about from when the work has changed from the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing. There's a piece of that in our country, but the work has gotten different, right? The complexity is higher, and I have a few more things that what are we expecting or what roles we're putting. I definitely had coach on a manager's plate. Therapist. I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that in a minute. I also think that there is this expectation that you have to be a strategist, a visionary, but you also need to know the details. And yes. I'm going to put on a role that I think is given to leaders, disciplinarian, right? So you are going to be the ones to discipline your people. You're the one who, hey, we're all going back into the office now. Yeah. Enforcer may be the better term for that. But with therapists, that came up a ton during COVID when things were just, we can all think back to that time going off the rails. And then there was a lot of work in the emotional well-being realm that leaders needed to do. And it's been an interesting shift now because I feel like people were like, bring your whole self to work. And now they're like, no. we don't want that part of you. So depending on the relationship, I think that therapist may be going back into and not as going back in the closet, right? Not as much. But yeah, I feel like it's shifting differently now in 2025 to where we were. I don't know.
I don't know about that because I think for a lot of people, right? And part of the conversation that we always have is like, well, what has changed since COVID and how do we leave remotely? And I always tell people, I don't think people were doing an excellent job of people leading pre-COVID. So we had the convenience of proximity that, we could peer over a wall, we could stop by the water cooler, but there was a lot of things sort of helping people. But I don't know that the transition is one that has been purely because of COVID, or we realize that people need more. I think COVID was definitely a door opener in that you literally had people whose children were sitting in their laps in meetings. And that some of that we are like, okay, they're back in school. Like, let's not go that far.
Yeah.
But if I think about leading teams pre-COVID, it was being a better people leader pre-COVID that helped me be a good people leader during COVID. And so I think that people just didn't have the language, didn't have the call out for it. But the memes that we see around what's a good manager were still the same back then. I think we probably just didn't have the same expectation or the same allowance to be human to people. That for me is what changed. But I also think that like you can't stuff something back in a box. And what I mean by that is even if you think about like the generational differences of Gen Z, they expect you to care about them as a whole person. They have such an individualized experience of life that it's really hard to say to them, well, we're going to come to work and we're going to treat everybody the same and we're not going to really care about you. They have that expectation. So I don't know that you can try to just shove it back into the box. I don't know how successful that would be.
I guess that we have to see, right? I don't think it's going to be successful from the employee perspective, but we're in this time where there's a very big power shift, right? So during COVID, employees had a lot more power, the great resignation, all of that. And now people are scared because of all the, layoffs everywhere, the economy the way it is now. And so employers have the power. And I hate it because there's such a shift, because then they're saying, we're going to get you back in the office 3 times a week, 5 times a week. I mean, all of these big companies, not all of that is generalization, but Amazon and the bigger companies, Google, we want you to be back, butts in seat. So they have the power. They can do that because people are scared and they're not going to.
I would not underestimate the human condition and the human spirit. Next week I'm going to Running Remote, a conference that's literally for companies that want to be remote first. And I'm excited about what they're doing. I'm excited to see how they're building culture across companies that are distributed. And I think as long as there is competition and technology, I think people will find a way to do what fits for them. Last year, I did a keynote about like how technology is changing the expectations around work. And we think a lot about, technology is great for business. AI is great for business, but it's also really great for individuals. It's great for people who want to do gig work. It's great for people who want to be solopreneurs. It's great for contractors. I mean, you think about you and I, right? We're running our own businesses and how much it has helped us to elevate. And so I think to a certain extent, like there will be some shift back to, it's not going to be the free roll, live everywhere you want to live and be fully distributed. But I do think we try to get people back into the office pretty significantly with mixed results. And I think people will continue to push back. I think they'll continue to find ways to do the things they want to do. And I also think, you have to have a compelling reason. So I know this is probably not where we thought we were going today, but let's just talk about it, right? Because a large part of what we're talking about now is employee engagement, right? We're talking about people wanting to come into the office, people wanting to be connected to other people and how we facilitate that. But I think Jamie Dimon was talking about like the brand new facility they have at JP Morgan Chase. And I remember reading the article and even posting about like, sir, nobody wants to live in your office. And, he was like, I want people to come in and I don't want them to ever want to leave. And that's really, ignoring that people have whole lives. They have children. They have, other competing demands, and they don't necessarily want to be in the office from morning till night. Again, especially younger generations. So I think there is still work to do to find the right balance of what people want and what companies want. And if I bring that back full circle to managers, right? I think managers are the people who sit in the middle of creating win-win situations for the organization and for employees. And so they do have that voice to say, maybe this isn't realistic. I have people on my team that have actual real needs to not be in the office every single day, or I'm watching them do work and they've done the work okay, not together. Or they might say, you know what, we have some newer employees who are missing that sense of connection, and so they do need to be, more connected, and we need them in the office for just setting a good foundation. So I think they have a good pulse on what is the center point between what the organization might want and what people might want, and can help organizations interpret that and do it in a way that's not feeling like I'm forcing you back into the office. Because while people don't mind change, they do mind change happening to them against their will. So I'm curious to see how this is going to turn out, but I am not underestimating the human condition.
No, and I say that it's the power shift now, but that doesn't mean people aren't biding their time until they can leave, right? Or they're going, I'm going to, phone it in because eventually I'm going to get out of here, right? So the power is going to shift back. It always does. I would love to get into some middle ground, but hey, that's just what I want. But going to the manager's been put in the spot, sometimes where they are the ones who, because they know their team and they can make exceptions, or they can say this works for my team, to where I believe Jamie Dimon said, no, sorry, it's not on the managers. Everyone is coming back. Like he took that power away. So it also depends. The manager does know about their team and does know how they can be connected and collaborate. But if the organization is not listening.
And you know what? So here's what's interesting to me about that, right? We always say, like, we love to say people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. But this is a perfect example of one of the frustrations of a people leader, which is I actually am not the decision maker of a lot of things that people are frustrated about. So to your point, I didn't decide, right, as a manager that people had to come back in. Jamie was like, we're all coming back in. It's a thing. And the role, the reason why we're overextended and our managers are frustrated is because then, to what you said earlier, they have to be the deliverer of that news, right? They have to be the person that calls you up and says, hey, you have to come back into the office. And people are upset as if you made that decision when really it's not in your hands. And I do think people will be surprised to know, in a lot of instances, when we say that people leave managers and not organizations, that a lot of the decisions underpinning what a manager says and does do come from the organization. There is a shared responsibility there. Yeah. And we don't necessarily always address that.
No, and also I want to address that people don't leave companies, that leave managers culturing up. I think we referenced culturing it last time, but they found that in their data, at least, that it wasn't the manager. It was that they didn't have growth and development opportunities. So interestingly enough, they could blame their manager for that. Who knows? I mean, we all have worked for people that we'd rather not work for, and maybe that has led us away. But it's not always the manager, right? Like the manager could be doing everything they can, but they don't see the growth and career growth and development opportunities ahead of them.
Yeah. And I think we should even dive into that a little bit, because when you think about, and this is where, like, I'm also an HR girly. I tell people that all the time. You can work for an organization that has no actual development options, right? So when we think about the joint relationship between a manager and the organization, and that can be like talent development, that can be HR, it can be, within the business line. If we don't have a structured development career progression in place, then we should not expect the manager to create one out of thin air, right? And I say that because I have spent, tons of time with people leaders, and what I can tell you is, lots of them don't know their own career directory, right? They don't know how to navigate their own careers, and yet we are asking them to then navigate someone else's, sometimes without systemic processes in place within an organization. So even if I wanted to develop you, right, for every single person, do I have a budget? Do I have a program to put you in? Do I have career pathways to point you to? Or am I being asked to create all of that from scratch myself? And don't get me wrong, right? As an L&D girl, I can do both, but can everyone do both? And that's not saying that you can't do the smaller things, like make sure that people have stretch assignments, make sure that people have development plans. But I am saying that it's a joint relationship between a manager and the structures that support them. And if they're not there, is that fair to then go back and be like, well, the manager didn't develop their person, they didn't have a career path?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say yes and to that because yeah, I think we do organizations, it's of course great for them having career progression. And so if they don't want to be a leader and there's a, they can go up in individual contributor mode. So yes, that's important. But I do think it's one thing that is put on the leaders, one more role that they're playing, that even just simply opening up the conversation is helpful. Right. So even if it's just saying, hey, what do you want to do? What's important to you? Is there any other area of the company I could expose you to? Is there a stretch assignment? So I think it can be formal, but it can also be really informal. And I think what you get back, what you said at the very beginning, it's just that humanness and asking what's important to that person.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I think it can be informal. I think they need support, I think is what I'm
Yes.
saying. You know what I mean? So like, I think about one of the things that I have helped managers to do is have what I call a gaps conversation, where they basically help somebody discover the gap between where they are today and where they want to be. And the number one comment I always get is, oh my gosh, no one's ever had this conversation with me. I wish somebody had this conversation with me. And so it's like, yes, we want them to do these things, but we have to make sure that they have been exposed to them and they know how to do these things, because there's a lot of what, right? Or a lot of should, like you should do this, you should do this, you should do that, without asking, like, do they know? Has anyone ever had that conversation with them? Just I think our good friends at Gallup just came out with their state of the employee workplace report today or yesterday. And they said something like only 44% of managers actually get training. And so like, where do they learn to do these things if not from training, or if not from experience?
Yes. Oh, okay. So this is where I saw a post on LinkedIn and I was 100% behind it with an asterisk, right? So the lead, it kind of burned me up a little bit because this person on LinkedIn was talking about how managers are responsible to give their employees feedback. 100% agree. I teach it.
Fair.
I love it. Like, right? Yes, it is their role. But who is actually supporting them, teaching them how to do it? And is their leader giving them feedback? And is their leader saying, hey, what's up with your team? Who's doing really well? Are they supporting them? Because I sat on the phone coaching someone, a new leader. We practiced and it took a lot of work to get that person to have a feedback conversation.
Oh, I'm
And so,
sure.
yes, it's the manager's role, but who's training them? Where's the accountability and where's the support? So
Yeah. And are they receiving what they're asked to give? Because I think that was the other thing we pointed out from Culture Amp, is that the more senior people are, the less likely they are to actually demonstrate leader behaviors. And I think that for me is part of the issue, because there turns into a lot of like, do as I say, not as I do.
yes.
And that's really hard because, I was working with a company and they were wanting to implement a listening software. So they bought, purchased whatever survey tool, and they were like, our managers aren't using it. They're not doing the thing. And when you're sleuthing around and you're asking, the thing that you come up with is that, well, their senior leaders aren't listening to them. Right. So how important is this really? Right. If you're not receiving it, because so much of what we learn is social cues, so much of what we learn about how to manage, what's important, what we should or should not do, does come from other people. It comes from what we experience. I tell people all the time, I was so fortunate to have people leaders who showed me the way, right? I had a wonderful manager who always made sure I had exposure to executives, who also showed me how to write my first brief, but who also sent me to go give someone feedback, and taught me how to coach people. I learned that from people leaders that I reported to. There's so many things that even if they weren't like, here's the lesson, Maria, I experienced it with them. And so I was like, oh, okay. One of the habits and routines or habits on my team has always been having either what I call birthday vacay, meaning like you're on my team, you're off for your birthday, or having a set time period that you are off to go do a family thing. And that came from a leader that I had who I had just joined the organization. I was, telling him I couldn't go on vacation. And he was our COO, right? So I reported up through him, and I was telling him how I couldn't go on vacation because I was so busy. I was rolling out our first org-wide employee engagement survey, blah, blah, blah. And he looks at me and he goes, Maria, are you more important than me? And I was like, excuse me, sir? And he was like, are you more important than I am here? And I was like, no. I felt confident that was the right answer. And he said, listen, if I can take my family, if I can stop what I'm doing and take my family on vacation, you can stop what you're doing and take your family on vacation. Come to my office and we're going to figure out how to make that work. It wasn't a training class. It wasn't any sort of, edict on work-life balance. It was real life. But from that conversation, it became a part of my personal habits and routines to take off a certain period of time every year. And it's something I passed on to my own teams to be like, listen, I expect that you will go on vacation and take time for yourself, your family. If you can figure out how to take that time off because you're so busy, come talk to me and we'll figure it out. And so I do think that the importance of senior leaders and executives, because I want to be really careful with these words, but executives who then have people that are directors, who then have people who are managers, that we're not abandoning things like, let me check in to see if you have balance. Let me make sure your workload is manageable. Let me make sure that you are getting feedback from me on what's right and what's wrong. If people are modeling it in real life, that becomes a part of the expectation. But if we're saying to people, once I get to a certain, status in the organization, it's not as important that I do those things, then that cascade of behavior is not happening in the organization. But we're saying to people who are at the bottom of all of this, or maybe even slightly in the middle, that you absolutely have to do these things that no one is doing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So a similar situation happened when I was working in corporate, and my peer would always be at work, like always at work. And I remember our boss said something to them, and it was more of I've told them they can go, I think it was, but the difference I guess it was permission, but it seemed different. It was kind of like, hey, I've noticed this and I really think you need to not work so much, instead of, hey, let's come down to my office. We're going to figure out how to get this done. Right. So I think there's a difference between
absolutely
noticing, telling, and hey, no, we're problem solving right now. This is going to happen. Right. And I think sometimes we stop at the, hey, I told them, but have you really said, no, this is so important. I'm going to carve out a little time and we're going to act like this is a work. It is a work problem, right? We're going to take time, but we're going to actually practice it. And also with senior leaders, and I'm going to be very frank here, right? There's a saying that says shit rolls downhill, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever is going on at the executive level, everyone is feeling that, right? And then when we talk about the people in the middle, then it's rolling up too, right? So they've got the needs of their people, and then it's not being modeled. I think what I have experienced, the higher it goes, the less feedback you get, the less is checking in. Hey, are you all right? Is this manageable? Because I think when you go to VP and above, depending on what the hierarchy is in the organization, those expectations are your work. You're just going to work. Right?
Absolutely. You're just going to work. But here's the thing that I think people miss is that VP and above have support that managers don't have. And so
in what way? You mean like
for
coaching?
example, I don't have an assistant, right? Like I still have to do the detail of work. And that goes away the more senior that you get, right? So some of the things that we have to think about, and I'll just tell you like another really quick story. I remember coming back. We were in the middle of COVID, and we were trying to figure out like who was coming back to the office and who wasn't coming back to the office. And there was this thing that was getting that we were having to fill out to figure out where our people were going to sit or be. And I called one of my colleagues because we went to go push said button and it didn't work. And I was like, is it working for you? She's like, it's not working for me. And I'm like, well, you can't, like, I don't know. So I'm talking to up my chain of command about this issue. And she says to me, oh, I didn't actually do it. My assistant did it. And I was like, oh, that's nice. But here I am struggling, right, with the thing I have to do that has the person above me doesn't actually have to do. And that's okay, right? Like there are different levels for a reason. But I think what I am is saying is that, like, the view from the sky and the view from the street are two different views. And it's so important to acknowledge that there are, yes, different demands and expectations, but oftentimes when you're a manager, you have the strategic responsibility still, the oversight. Like you said, you have to have vision. You went back to the roles that we have to have, right? You have to be a strategist. You have to figure things out. But you're still very much responsible for a lot of the tactical things that have to happen at the same time, which leads us to that overextended part, because a lot of times at the more senior you get, the less responsible you are for tactical, and you're more like just on the vision, the strategy, things of that nature. So I think it is so important for people to recognize that that's why the role is so hard, because there are some things that go away as you elevate, but there are some things that until then, you're still knocking it out every day.
Yeah. And I think too, something that resonated with me, I had a podcast guest that was talking about how when you go up in hierarchy or status and you get distance, right? That buys you distance, right? So maybe it's your admin doing some work that you're not doing. But there's that different view that you pointed out. But also I find that when the higher you are in an organization, the more likely you are going to get supported, right? You can get an executive coach. Like if you are a VP or above and you're causing some problems, they will make sure
You'll make sure. They absolutely will.
You get coached, right? But that support is not in the middle management. Like I feel like that is sure, people have some trainings and things like that, but coaching's not really available to them, right? So at least that I've seen in organizations, there are some leaders who are really good about, I'll get you a coach if you need a coach, right? But it's very much one-offs as opposed to everyone can have. And I know that's costly, right? But there are certain experiences, I guess, with the higher you go that you get support.
Yeah. Well, and I think I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? Because I think it has been traditionally costly. I will caveat that, we are in the middle of a lot of shift in how we deliver things that previously we couldn't deliver at scale. And so that has changed some things, but absolutely investment goes higher up. And I think, you and I probably are aligned in this. I have always been curious about why we don't invest in people leaders earlier in their careers instead of waiting for them to get so high up to then be like, oh, it's a dumpster fire over there. Because a hard truth, right, is that with that elevation comes ego. And I'm saying that like neutrally, not like, bad, but the way organizations are structured, positional power comes with that elevation. And so people are less likely to be like, oh, that was not the best way to say that, or, oh, that could have been done differently. So you're less likely to even receive the signals that you need to change something from somebody who's going to be like, well, I don't want to, that could be not a safe conversation to have, to tell my, leader that they probably could have done that differently. And then you have the sort of ego of like, well, but if this was so wrong with me, how did I get in this role? So there's a lot that comes with waiting until someone is very senior to then say, oh, now you need a coach, instead of saying, you know what, let's figure out how to give people the support earlier so that when they're growing, they're getting this feedback along the way, they're getting this coaching along the way. So it's not such a sharp U-turn when they get to a certain space in the organization.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know as a new leader, I didn't receive any training. I got training along the way, like for one-off classes and things like that. But it's almost like when organizations give you a title, then you're just supposed to know what to do. But when you're dealing with humans, like they're always going to throw you for a loop, right? So no matter what it is, there's a new situation that comes up. And I think that the way organizations approach leadership training is it's a one and done situation. It's hey, we're going to put you in a 1-day course, and if you're lucky, maybe you get a 3-day course, and that's like pretty extreme and unusual. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden, you're supposed to be a leader with like no practice, no anything like that. You have all this knowledge, and it just goes back to knowledge doesn't equal you being a good leader. So even if you read all the
Yeah.
books, like until you put something in practice over and over and over and have that support there with you as you put it in practice and screw up, because anything you try new, we talked about last week,
Yeah.
you're not going to be that effective at. So it's trying. And, you know, I don't know. I feel like in my experience, and I want to hear yours as well, they save it for the high potential people. And I kind of hate that word. I heard someone from, I think it was HP, like
Mm-hmm.
few years ago, and it stuck with me. And she's like, everyone's got potential. And when you start looking at people, like everyone's got potential instead of this little group over here, it just opens up leadership opportunities among the whole organization. So I've seen it more. Here's our special people, or here's a one-off class, or, but that's what I've seen.
We went back and forth about whether or not we were going to talk about leader versus manager, but I think this is a great time to go ahead and throw that back in the mix. And here's why.
Come on.
You and I both deal with managers. For the longest time, like I have literally never, even though I worked in leadership development, like we went and saw my title, whatever, I always really steered clear of leadership because everybody and their
The
mom,
term leadership?
the
Is that what you're
term,
saying?
yes, the term leadership and leadership development in general, because everybody and their mama is a leader. Seriously. I'm a leader, you're a leader, you're a peer leader, you're this, like it gets very ubiquitous. And so when we start talking about like the chosen few, it's like we see something in you that you can be a great leader. But like manager is a job, right? Like it is a box on the org chart that signifies that there are boxes below mine and I have a responsibility to do certain things for those humans. That is so different from like peer leadership or self leadership or all the leaderships that we do. And I think when we have these like special leadership programs, we're saying I see you as having the potential to maybe be an executive. I think that you could be like a division. Like I think we are saying that you have the potential to influence, formally or influence, and let's cultivate that in you. And I do think leadership is a part of being a manager, but I think when we start to sort of interchange like leadership and management, this is my own little soapbox, so
go on.
But when we interchange like leader versus manager, I think that's where it gets muddy for people really fast.
Yeah.
Because they don't know if we're talking about senior leaders. They don't know if we're talking about like you being the best little leader that there is who, led a project. You and me, we talk about managers and like they should lead and they should have leadership capabilities, but we are talking about very specific people in organizations who need support. And I think that's so important to distinguish because you can't solve a problem if we're not saying the same words. And that sort of like, you're a special person who needs leadership. I've seen, and I would love if anybody out there has data about the success of leadership development programs and the outcomes for specific populations in terms of like managers, executives, directors. I would love to see it because I think that's why it's so hard for us to wrap our hands around it because who are we even talking about?
Yeah. Well, I was actually talking to a colleague yesterday and I was talking about the podcast and she's like, well, were we talking about leaders or were we talking about managers? And I was like, wait. And nothing wrong with it, right? Equated it with senior leaders. Leaders, we're talking about executives and senior leaders. And I was like, okay. And it's almost like whenever you talk about managers, it just doesn't sound like no one wants to say manager because it doesn't sound sexy or fun or anything like you're like, you're a manager, right?
Yes.
And that's unfortunate because managers are leading too, right?
Managers are leading too. And, my pie in the sky goal. So we started off talking about redefining the role, right? My pie in the sky goal is for people to become managers and for it to not be a dirty word. I did a Disrupt HR talk, and I was talking about reclaiming the word manager because I was having lunch with somebody and I said, manager, and she was like, and I was explaining that my podcast is called Manager to Manager, and she asked me like, why did I name it that? And she then went on to tell me that the word manager gives her the ick. Like, she doesn't like the word. And I talked to several people like, I don't like the word manager.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well,
Okay.
I get it. I respect it. And I always say you can also find me in like the LinkedIn comments tussling when people are talking about leader versus manager, because I'm just like, that's not a conversation that's moving us forward. But I think it's because, manager, like it's such an important role. It is. You and I talk often about, the impact of AI and is it going to change what we do? And, will we even need managers? And that's probably a conversation for a different day. But when I think about my role as a manager and I think about the years that I've led teams, it has been less about the work. It has been more about seeing the potential of people, making sure that they are doing work that is engaging and interesting and is helping them grow. It's about making sure that the business is getting what they need. But when I think about, what my pie in the sky goal is, I want people to feel honored to be a manager. I want people to be like, this is a calling. It's something I do really well. I look at my team and they are happy and they are healthy and they are, thriving. And I am the conductor of that experience. Like, that's what I want people to think about when they think manager. Leader feels good because it's like, I would say that, leader and manager are like fun aunt and parent. Like, the fun aunt takes you shopping, she makes you feel good. And when you see all these leader versus manager posts, right, they're always like, they make you feel seen. Yes, but your parents like, girl, eat those vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And so I,
Yeah.
I think there's room there to be like, managers, they do good work. They have a very important purpose.
Yeah, and it's funny, I named my podcast The Made Leader, but I named it that because the Gallup research that showed that 90% of us don't have these natural abilities just to lead someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like it's hard. And so can we quit pretending like managing people, leading people, I don't care what the hell you call it, taking care of people to move the work forward. It's a hard job. And I
Very.
bless the 10% of people who find it easy breezy and I just lead people and it's naturally uh-uh.
If you
It
find
has
it easy
always been
breezy,
hard.
you're not doing it right. If you find it easy breezy, you're not doing it right.
Maybe you're not stretching and growing. It's
You're
always
not.
been
I mean,
hard
I
for
call
me.
it a full contact sport. Literally, managing people is a full contact sport because one, you are in the middle of everyone's expectation. So you are the arbiter of the experience of people who are beneath you, and you're responsible for their engagement and their happiness and their development and their growth and their performance, like all the things.
Mhm.
And when they are unhappy, they let you know it. But then you have people above you that want you to execute, want you to be strategic, want the clients to be happy, right? They're very focused on those outcomes. And when that doesn't come together, you hear about it.
Mhm.
But you don't actually always have the capability to influence the things that people are upset about one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think what we're missing too is like we have this natural wiring in our brains to be socially connected. We want to be liked, right? I don't care who says, I don't care who likes me. And that's not your job as a manager. It's not your job as a manager to get everyone to like you.
Yeah.
But it sucks when you upset your team, right? It sucks when you give someone feedback and they don't like it, right? But you have to do it, or your boss isn't like it feels like it goes against our wiring. And truth be told, if you are leading or managing, um, people aren't going to like you because you have to make some tough calls. Hopefully, they respect you and they understand the decision that was made. But it can be lonely for that reason because you're not everyone's favorite person. Sorry.
Well, and it can be lonely because I always tell people like you're on the team, but you're not of the team. And what I mean by that is like you are on the team, but you also have to maintain a certain amount of distance from the people who report to you. Like you have to have a little bit of a barrier there. There's conversations that you can't share with them. There's decisions you can't share with them. And so when you start thinking about, people not liking you or, one of the interesting things I remember being in, a senior leader meeting And we were just talking about like, being on the same page. So it's like we might disagree in this room, but when we leave this room, we are lockstep, one band, one sound. And that's hard because then you go back to your team who reports to you, and you can't always tell them the why of a decision, right? And you have to be the face of that decision, whether you agreed with that decision or not. And that may cause them not to like you, right? And so you definitely have to figure out how to ride that line of not necessarily wanting them to like you, but being able to be someone who, even when they disagree with what you say or the decision you make, they still know that it's coming from a place of respect, of thoughtfulness, and concern for them as an individual. So they can disagree without disliking you, but it's hard to get there.
Yeah, and I like what you said about you can argue all you want, but you go out on the same page because that has happened in situations. I was, talking to a leader of a leader and they made a decision and then the leader, that reported to her went and said, "Yeah, I don't really like this decision, but here it is," right? Because she wanted to be like it is that natural
You can't do that,
inclination to be like, "Yeah, sorry, leadership, you're throwing it on your it was
right?
on me." Um, but yeah, you have to be on the same page as part of being a leader. But I think it is like if we could even go to some problem solving, and it is who you promote in the first place. Why
Yeah.
do you even want to be a leader? I had to have a hard conversation with someone to say, hey, I know you don't want to give feedback. Get it. Totally. Do you want to lead? Because if you want to lead, that's a requirement, right? If you don't want to
Yeah.
give back, then hey, sorry, maybe this isn't the role for you because we don't give people, it can be wonderful, right? But I think I know when I first got promoted into leadership, it was like titles, status, exciting, something new, fresh. And we're not saying, hey, look, this is going to suck sometimes. Please tell me why you want to be a leader, right?
Yeah. So, what's funny about that is I was sitting on a panel with some like college hires, university hires.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, career progression, all the things. And one of them said, when should I try to be a manager? And I was like, oh, okay, day three. Like, come on in here. And I said, well, look, why do you want to be a manager? And he was like, well, because that's when you start making more money. And I was like, okay, slow down, Speed Racer. As it turns out, this level of management is where you get the medium bucks. It's not like the big bucks. And I want you to really be careful in your expectation of that, because a lot of this role is doing your own job first. So I want you to be disillusioned that you're going to stop doing the work you are doing.
Yep.
And then on top of that, you have a team to lead, performance reviews to do, like all of the things. I want to be clear about this because I want to level set your expectation that like you're aspiring to be a manager, when if you just want to make more money, the folks in sales, like
Right.
my person down there, the person that like 2 seats down is the head of sales. Go talk to him.
Yeah. And that's why it's important for organizations to have that individual contributor role that stacks up, right? That you can keep excelling, and if money is your thing, good, right? But management's not always going to get you there, that extra money, although you get a little bump, right? But it makes sense, and we can't expect people to be altruistic and, oh, I just want to lead people and change their lives. Great, right? I'd love it to be that way, but it's not. So I love that you were real about cool. If that is your goal, here are some 3 different ways to make money
Here
and
are
not be.
3 different ways to do that. I can point you to other parts of the organization that are not about leading people because, like you said, it's going to suck sometimes. And not even like it's not even the feedback part, because I do think, going back to leadership, I think there are some things that are like general leadership, and feedback is one of them. If we're working on a project together and we're peers and you're stinking it up, I'm going to give you feedback because we got this project to do. And I don't want to do it all myself. So, like, I'm going to still give you feedback. But there will be times when you will have conversations like, hi, you don't work here anymore as of today. That is a hard conversation to have with somebody, right? Especially, think about what's happening in the world right now, layoffs all over the place.
Mhm.
And so when you think about a layoff conversation, it is typically the manager that has to go in first. So HR is not the one that calls them in to say, you don't work here anymore. Your manager typically is. They have to get you on the line, and they have to, read their little script that says, we are relocating your position to another location. But like, you are the person that has to deliver that news to somebody that may or may not have been on your team for 5 or 6 years, feel like family. You've had dinner at like, there's all these things that are not just, the regular, you don't want to give people feedback. There's legitimately the time you have to go into, and I say this because I've done it, right? I've had to go to sit somebody and get them on a call and say, you too, right? And say, I'm so sorry, we've made a decision, and we're going to have to separate your employment. That's a hard conversation to have with somebody. It's a hard conversation when someone comes to you and says, hey, I've been with the company for 5 or 6 years and my raise has been like this much. Like, can we talk about this? You run it up the chain. The chain says, nope, that it is what it is. You have to be the person to go back to them and say, I'm so sorry. We're not going to be able to do a salary adjustment for you right now. So like, those are the hard conversations that you have to have as a people leader, the thick skin that you have to have, because right after you separate somebody, you've got to go build the pieces of the people left behind, and you've got to have conversations with them about whether or not their jobs are secure. And you have to do all of this while wondering if your own job is secure. So I think, the real part of this, sometimes we talk about kind of the surface level things that you have to do, but those for me are the hard conversations when no one has done anything wrong, and yet and still we have to have a difficult conversation with them.
Yeah, and sometimes conversations you think are gonna go well don't, right? So that just made me think of when I gave someone what I thought was a great review. They were, like, above, like, so at the time, we had, like, above expectations, and then there was one above that. I can't remember nuance.
Yeah, walks on water.
The person yeah, like, ain't nobody getting that, right?
Right.
A 4, I gave that person. I was like, "Oh, they're gonna be so excited." No, they were not. They wanted that 5, and I was like, you ain't getting it. It's just not gonna happen. And so you never know how people are gonna react. Even when you think it's gonna be good news, you're dealing with a human on the other side that had different expectations potentially. And then that's gonna show up, and then you're like, whoa. how, how do I navigate this?
How
Right.
do
So
I navigate this?
it's all the things that can come up potentially. And
Yeah.
that's why a one-day event of a training your leaders, it's a start. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but to retain that knowledge, and then how do you then go, okay, how do I actually apply that to that situation that may happen 6 months down the road?
Yeah. And I think part of it too is some of the most difficult things are not things that we train people on anyway. Right?
True.
Like, I mean, again, I do not go to a single how to lay off people training.
You had to say that when I was taking a sip of water.
I'm being honest, right? Like, there was not a training for that. Now I will say I'm encouraged because I was facilitating a conversation among senior leaders, and one of the HR directors was talking us through what they were doing to prep their managers, and I was like, gold star. Like, they had them practicing the conversations, they did so many things, and I was like, I love that. But traditionally, the really hard things that I've had to do as a people leader were not in any training. Like, someone on your team is missing, there was not a playbook for that one. And so I think that, like, you have to recognize that, there's basic level management stuff, but people also need support for the one-offs. My favorite thing to talk about is when we were in the middle of COVID, I started an internal coaching community for our managers because there simply was no playbook for we're all at home. My house is now a restaurant, school, hotel. Like, which training module was that covered in? There wasn't. So I do think we have to acknowledge that, new and novel and dramatic is a large part of what managers also have to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not something that your AI bot's going to do for them. Like, that's a person that has to have the conversation when something, catastrophic or huge happens. And they have to be taught how to handle some of those situations with grace and care because they are so important. But again, I've never I've never developed a training for something like that. I've never been through the training for something like that. So I think there are times when we have to recognize that they do a lot of what's not textbook too.
Yeah, and I think that continued support is something we both advocate for. Is not only continued support, but safety in saying what needs to be said, because I think a lot of people are filtered in organizations because you kind of have to be, right? So how
Mm-hmm.
can you give continuous support in an environment that feels like, if I say this, is it going to be held against me, or am I going to, get my high potential status yanked away because I complained about something, right? Um, and that continuous support in a safe community is vital. And I I don't. I was talking to an L&D leader this week, and I remember I was running something past her and talked about the concept of community, right? And automatically, her hackles were raised, like, community, like, uh, I don't know if anyone's going to feel safe. Like, the safety aspect came up right away when you're
Yeah.
talking about in an organization, right? Because you can, I don't know, you can only say so much in any organization and feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be very mindful. So like when we started a coaching community internally for our managers, like there were rules, meaning like one, if you weren't actively like I was checking org charts. If you weren't a people leader, you couldn't come in.
Mhm.
And at first they were like our HRBPs were like, well, can we come in? And I was like, I don't know you, stranger, go away. But after a couple of iterations, I was like, okay, you guys can come in too. And they could come in because sometimes we need to have a question answered, like, okay, can I do this and not get fired or no? Yes, okay, great. And so we found that they were really great advisors, but we definitely gate kept the experience because we wanted that, and we had a very clear, like, this is Vegas, and we separated people out, and we kept it problem focused. But like, people needed that outlet to be able to
Mhm.
talk through what was happening in the organization. And we also gave them very like constructive ways to have the dialogue. I think that's one of the parts that's really important. So it wasn't like come in and gripe. It was come in and let's talk about the problem. Like, here's what we heard you say were some of the things that you're struggling with. Problem A, problem B, problem C, problem D. Problem E is choose your own adventure. If there's something else that's really pressing, cool. Then we taught them how to do like brainstorming around the topic, right? And how to evaluate. Like, we basically helped them think through how they were going to attack what they were doing so that it didn't come across as like complaining or name calling in a situation,
Mhm.
but gave them a constructive way to do things. I think that's so important because one of the things that we don't often talk about, I think you and I have alluded to it, is that people leading is lonely.
Mhm.
It is lonely because even if you are a leader and I am a leader and we're leading our teams, we may not always cross, like, unless we're friends, you're probably not gonna come to me like, hi Maria, did it happen? Or I'm gonna come to Jen, this happened. And
Mhm.
so I think it's so important that people have that deliberately and on purpose, that you're not just like, oh, I have friends, because there are going to be situations that come up that you are not going to be able to talk to somebody about if that mechanism is not there.
Yeah, sounds like it was coaching, right? Because I think there's nothing better than getting someone else's perspective. I mean, assuming that they can coach and not tell, right? But sometimes you hear yourself say something, and you're like, "Oh, good Lord." You can kind of it is just that time and that space to, here's the situation, and then what are the options, right? So you're thinking through the options. I think that I love that you did that and you were able to do that internally. And I encourage other organizations to consider some kind
Yeah.
of peer coaching, group coaching in a safe environment. But we're running out of time, so we need
We
to
can do this
land the
all day.
plane. I know. Well, we're gonna go again next week, but
Yes.
how should we end this?
Um, well, here's what I would say. I think that, people leaders need support. I think that it's so important that we really think about why they struggle sometimes and what they need in order to move successfully. And so you and I have talked about, people needing um, community, needing support. And so there's opportunities for that for people who are interested. And so I would say, you and I both run manager communities. You have open enrollment for yours right now. I have open enrollment for mine right now. So if you're finding yourself alone and you want to join a community, I encourage you to visit Jen and visit me and see, if you need help with those moving forward with problem solving with what's happening in the world and you're not getting that support in your organization. I think we both just want you to know that support's out there. It's here if you need it. So yeah, that's what I would say to end us.
Yeah, and I'd say, well, I'm not going to let you end us yet. I'm just so I'd also just tack on to that. If you're an organization and you don't have the resources to build a leader program, or you have no L&D department, then tap into us, because it is that external place that can build the safe community, and you don't have to do that, right? We can do it for you. So next week, we're going to talk about what happens if the role of the manager is eliminated, right? What if we have no managers anymore? What do we do? Pros, cons? We're going to talk about that next Thursday.
Yes. Oh, and I do want
Sound
to add
fun?
one more thing.
Yeah.
Invest in your managers. I have literally, I'm going to say it straight up. I have been on a number of calls this week where people who have said to me, we think this is great. Our company doesn't want to invest in managers. I want to just bring us full circle to, if we say that managers have more influence on people than their doctors, if we say that 70% of employee engagement comes down to the manager, we do have to support them in being successful. So that's something that, whether it's Jen, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else, managers do need support. They have an important role to play in the organization. We'll talk more about that next week, but I'm going to leave with just invest in your managers. They need it.
Good way to end. Maria, thanks so much. This has been fun, and hopefully people get something out of it.